Two Green Party leadership candidates say they were subjected to racist slurs last night. The incident happened during a virtual town hall with all the candidates present. One candidate, Annie Paul, was called a derogatory term for Black people by someone watching the town hall. Another candidate, Miriam Haddad, was the target of an anti-Semitic slur. The slurs were sent via the virtual meeting's chat box. The party says it's investigating the incident and claims the person using the racist language is not a party member. For more on what happened, we have reached leadership candidate Annie Paul. She's with us from Toronto. Hi, Ms. Paul. Good to see you again. Thank you very much for making time. Wish it were under different circumstances.
Yes, but it's good as always to see you, Vashi.
Let me start off and just by asking if you can sort of describe for our viewers who wouldn't have been part of this town hall exactly what happened and what you saw.
We had just begun our second regional debate. This one was on the prairies, and in the chat some comments popped up and you mentioned them. One used the word N several times. The other one referred to another candidate as an effing Jew. And those popped up. I believe it was just the panelists and the moderators that could see them. And so it was a surprise. It was a shock. I believe that both of those comments were intended for me. I'm the only Jewish candidate. I'm also the only Black candidate in the race. And so we continued with the debate. The several people, we don't know how many people it was, were ejected from the meeting, and we continued more or less as scheduled.
So you had to see that while you were basically in the middle of a debate. Is that accurate?
I had to see it right at the beginning, actually. And the first question went to me after we saw that. So as you can imagine, it was fairly distracting.
Yeah, I can only imagine that's the least of it. I mean, I guess I can only imagine what your reaction was in the moment. What can you tell us?
Well, first I should clarify, we have no idea, we have no way of knowing at this stage whether these were party members or not. We know that it's very easy for people to take on aliases in order to join calls. And so I'm looking forward to a really thorough investigation. And as I understand it, the party has contacted the RCMP, and I'm looking forward to playing any role I can in clarifying that. And unfortunately, I will say that as shocking as it was to see both of those, especially during a debate, it certainly hasn't been the only occasion during the campaign that I've been subject, particularly to anti-Semitic comments. But so it was novel, but it wasn't the first time.
Can you expand on that a little bit? So has this been a big issue throughout the campaign for you?
Well, it's been, I would say, 2 or 3 months since it became common knowledge that it's always been common knowledge that I'm Black, but it's become common knowledge that I'm Jewish as well. And it really has seemed to unleash quite a torrent of comments. I've had several comments put to me that really could only have been put to me because of my my religion. And so, yes, it has been an ongoing issue throughout the last 2 or 3 months of the campaign.
What do you think about that? Like, how has that impacted your ability to campaign, your desire to be a candidate? Like, has it had an impact on any of that?
It took me aback. I'm very aware. I'm Jewish, and of course my partner is as well, and his family. They're survivors on his mother's side, and so I have a front row view to anti-Semitism and the impact of it. But you can still be taken aback by it. And, there are always difficult moments that come up that you don't expect. My children, for instance, they're very excited about my campaign. Of course, it's their first political campaign, and I wouldn't have wanted them to have this particular introduction to politics in Canada. So it's something that we rise above. We always try to use these opportunities to educate and also to improve policies within the party with respect to anti-discrimination. But I don't think it's ever something you ever become completely accustomed to.
I wouldn't imagine so. 2 questions based on what you just said, and the second one I'll ask you is about the party. But the first is you mentioned your kids having to be subjected to this. What do you tell them about it?
Well, first I tell them they should feel very proud to be Black and very proud to be Jewish, and that nothing that anyone says can take that away. I also tell them that really very early on in life, when you have those identities, you have to make a choice about whether you're going to give into the anger and the hurt, or whether you're going to try to be part of the solution, whether you're going to try to educate anyone who has an open mind and is willing to learn about the history of our peoples. And, those people who do have the closed minds and there's nothing that's going to change them, I also teach them to stand up and to fight and to not be silent, because the silence is what breeds and emboldens the hate in the first place.
Let me ask you about that point specifically. You tweeted last night about the incident and you wrote, "Party silence emboldened hate." What exactly did you mean by that?
What you always want to see when you notice a growing trend of discrimination, whether it's anti-Semitic or otherwise, you want to see institutions in particular taking a very vocal, firm stand, and you want them to be actively monitoring those incidences. And I know I love the Green Party, and it's been my only political home. And of course, I'm running for the leadership of it. I'm aware that it's a relatively small party compared to the other major parties, but we have to hold ourselves to the same standards. And I would say that in this instance, I've been disappointed by the lack of by the level of responsiveness of the party. I've seen that they've taken some steps in the last 24 hours. I'm encouraged by them. We're going to have some conversations, but I don't believe this would have gotten as far if it had been called out earlier.
Yeah, I just want to follow up with you on that. We got a statement from them just before the show, and it's a longer one, so I don't want to read all of it. But with respect to what you're saying, today, Ms. Roberts again expressed outrage, that's the interim leader, and dismay at the attacks. We're all horrified by what's been happening since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. We've all been forced to navigate a new virtual reality for conducting meetings and our leadership contest debates. Unfortunately, this leaves us vulnerable to such hateful attacks. We're taking added precautions, and this is to your point, to avoid any recurrence. During the remainder of the leadership contest, we'll be disabling the public chat feature on Zoom. We must strive to keep online spaces a safe place for discussion and dialogue. We must work together to call out discrimination in all its forms. We sincerely apologize to everyone who was impacted by this horrible event. Does that go far enough for you, like those measures shutting off the chat, or do you think that there are additional steps that the party should and could take?
So I believe that any public indication of any condemnation of discrimination is something that's really welcome. As I said, what I want to see is a police investigation. It's absolutely it's hate speech, and it's something that should be investigated. I believe that we had the ability to have those protocols in place prior to this call. I think that the idea that this was completely unavoidable perhaps is not true. And as I said, we still don't know whether these are members or not. And so I want to make sure that that we're doing all we can to identify the perpetrators. And I certainly hope that they're not. It's completely possible that they're not. I just want to make sure, for the sake of the party. And yes, the more that we can do to bring protocols in that are going to allow us to have these discussions in a civilized way, I'm absolutely all for that.
I hope you don't mind. I wanted to ask you about one other topic, because you're with us. And the last time we spoke, it was in your role as foreign affairs critic during the election for the party. I know you've done a lot of work in the area of citizenship and immigration. So I do want to ask about that decision that came down today. If you'll bear with me, I just want to explain it for our viewers. A federal court decision was delivered on the government's initial decision to suspend the Safe Third Country Agreement. The court ruled the agreement in place with the United States, which says that an asylum claimant can't make their claim at a U.S.-Canada border. So it was basically, the agreement itself was suspended, and people are being turned back to the and what the decision says is that it violates the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It's given the government 6 months basically to react to that. What do you think they should do?
What I think is that they should reverse that decision tomorrow, because every day they delay is a day that they put lives at risk. As soon as that decision came out, I spoke out against it. Our campaign spoke out against it. We put out policies with respect to it. We've said all along that the United States is not a safe third country. It has become less safe during the pandemic. that we were not respecting our international obligations. And even beyond our international obligations, we were not respecting our moral and ethical obligations. So this is a decision that we have been speaking regularly about and condemning. I'm really, really pleased to see the court's decision today. And I would remind the government that every moment that they delay this decision, they are putting people at risk of being sent back to countries where they risk torture, death, or other kinds of really, really grievous bodily harm. And it is a complete contradiction of Canadian values for us to have done this in the first place.
The decision also made some very specific comments about the environment which greets them when they are turned back, basically, to the United States. I should have done a better job of explaining it to our viewers, but basically, we've discussed the Safe Third Country Agreement so often because the quote-unquote loophole in it allows for people to basically cross in between official points of entry. And what this decision had done was not allow them essentially to do that anymore and be turned back to the United States. And I just would end, I guess, on asking you for your thoughts on what the decision says about the environment that greets them there.
Yeah, my work and the reason that I was the international affairs critic is that I spent many years abroad working in the fields of conflict prevention and human rights. My partner as well as an international human rights lawyer, and people are awaiting grievous conditions that put their lives, the lives of their children at risk. We're talking about people who are fleeing gang warfare. We're talking about people who are fleeing civil war. We're talking about people who are fleeing drug wars, people who are fleeing because of their gender identities. And so our obligation, our international obligation under international law, but also our moral obligation as Canadians is to create a safe haven for anyone who needs it. And so this is something that we should all be demanding, that the government respect this decision at the earliest possible date, and that should be immediately.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for your time, Ms. Paul. Really
Thank you very
appreciate it.
much.
Good to see you again. That's
Thank
Green
you.
Party leadership candidate Annamie Paul. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.